What's up, folks? Welcome back to the Whoop podcast. I'm your host, Will Ahmed, founder and CEO of Whoop, and we're on a mission to unlock human performance. If you're thinking about joining Whoop, you can visit our website, sign up for a free 30-day trial. That's right, try Whoop for 30 days, no cost to you. Today, I'm joined by Dermot Whelan. Dermot is an award-winning radio and TV broadcaster, author, comedian, podcast host, and meditation expert. As the host of the Mindful podcast, Dermot is sharing his wealth of knowledge and teachings around meditation, stress management, positivity, and more. Dermot and I discuss how Dermot found a passion for comedy relating to an extreme sport. Dermot shares a great story about jumping out of a plane versus doing stand-up, finding meditation and how he practices it today, Dermot's commitment to a healthier lifestyle. He talks about how others around him were the first to notice changes in his demeanor, myths that society has developed around meditation and mindfulness, how he has used Whoop for many years, and the power of fulfillment in your work and everyday life. If you have a question was answered on the podcast, email us podcast@whoop.com, call us 508-443-4952. Without further ado, here is my conversation with comedian and mindfulness expert Dermot Whelan. Dermot, welcome to the Whoop podcast.
Well, absolute pleasure to be here.
I'm stoked to have you on. Let's go back in time. How did you find comedy?
Wow. The airplane movies. That was my first introduction. Myself and my brother learned the script off by heart to Airplane 1 and 2. And that was, I guess, the time when I realized you could be weird and surreal, and be funny. And Monty Python, of course. I used to watch all those as a kid. The Flying Circus VHSs that I could get my hands on. So that was kind of my first entry into it. Then I started making silly home movies, at home. And
How old were you when you were doing that?
a teenager, like 15, 16, that kind of thing. And then I kind of left it behind. I studied archaeology in university because I was a massive Indiana Jones fan. I quickly realized that real archaeology is nothing like it's nothing like Indiana Jones. In fact, Indiana Jones was a terrible archaeologist. That's what I mainly learned. He documented nothing, had no respect for local tribes or customs, and every building he went into eventually collapsed. So, after that, I worked in film for most of my 20s, and I actually only got into stand-up comedy when I was 30. And just loved it straight away. I got into improv as well. So, and now I blend stand-up comedy and meditation, which is weird to a lot of people, but it really works.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about meditation. I want to understand. So that's an interesting journey in a way, right? Because for most of your 20s, you weren't doing stand-up comedy or you weren't doing it at all, right? And so what was that moment where you said, actually, I want to be the one on stage?
It was another stand-up comedian who got me into it. He's actually a New Yorker, a guy called Des Bishop. And my first job in radio was working in news. So I used to stay back. I just could do an impression of a newsreader, and that's why I got the job. I didn't know anything about current affairs or world affairs or anything. I could just do the at 6:00 here are the headlines. And I gave it a lot of that, but I used to stay behind after work and use the newsroom equipment to make comedy sketches, which then started getting played on the late night shock jock show. And while I was doing that, when Des, the stand-up comic, heard them, because he used to do bits on the show too, and asked me to come in and just try 5 minutes. So I was pretty reluctant because it scared the what out of me. But I guess for many comedians, once you get up there and you get that buzz, it can be really special. I was always quite an anxious person, particularly in my 20s, and I was just talking to another stand-up comic about this week as to why do people who have issues with anxiety end up gravitating towards jobs that would terrify people who have no issues with anxiety, particularly stand-up comedy, or doing anything on a stage. And the chap I was talking to, he suggested that maybe, while you're up there, the anxiety actually disappears. You get into that flow state. And you don't feel anxiety there. So I guess it's this sort of precious window of performance, And I guess athletes, of which, you have so much, interaction with, must feel the same thing, that for that window of time when you're in that flow state, you're not second guessing yourself. One of the components of flow state is that you stop judging yourself, and so I guess that's what drew me to it, and kept me going back up for more.
The comparison between stand-up comedians and professional athletes, I think, is actually a good one. Sort of, it's not, I think, the most obvious one.
Yeah, I doubt their recovery scores are
Yeah,
similar.
well, that's right.
I would say the comedians live a bit harder.
But there's this feeling of you do all this work behind the scenes for a very intense, high pressure moment. Like, I
Mm,
was listening to an interview that Jerry Seinfeld did, and he was talking about when you see those, Olympic skiers at the very top of the mountain, and the only thing between them and the bottom of the mountain is this little stick, and they know that in the next 90 seconds their life's going to change
mm,
for one way or the other. And he's like, yeah, and I know what that feeling's like, to be right there on those blocks right before it goes.
yeah,
And he was referring to the pressure of, having done all this work to then have 90 seconds on Carson, or, 4 minutes on the Tonight Show or whatever. And it's like, hey, if this goes well, like, you're going to be on one track, and if it goes poorly, you're on another. And there was something kind of, brilliant thinking about that. And I also have a deep appreciation for the intensity of the moment that you feel when you get on that stage and you've got 1,000, 10,000 people, and the room's kind of just dead. Like, you
mm.
have to make it happen.
Yeah, I've often compared it to an extreme sport.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember jumping out of an airplane with a good pal of mine who's also a stand-up comic, and we were doing it. Obviously, it was on purpose. There
Yeah,
wasn't a
that's
problem
that's a
with the
good
plane.
start. Yeah.
We weren't crashing or anything, but it was a charity parachute jump. And when we got to the ground, obviously, our adrenaline was sky high. We were like, "Oh my god, that was amazing!" And then we kind of looked at each other and went, "Still not as scary as stand-up,"
Yeah, that's
you know.
funny.
And so I do see it as an extreme sport. I like to skateboard, and I find if I don't do it, if I leave gaps between it, I'm just not as comfy on the board, as a middle-aged guy flying down a hill, than if I'm doing it all the time. And I think any kind of extreme sport is like that as well. That anything that's high adrenaline, the more you do it, you have to keep doing it, or else the fear creeps back in. And stand-up comedy is very much like that, and certainly improv as well. You have to be even sharper, I think, because obviously you have no script. So yeah, I think the extreme sport, anything that requires lots of adrenaline, is a good comparison.
Do you remember your first time on stage doing stand-up?
Yeah, I do. I felt sick for about a week before it.
Just because 'cause you're so anxious or so
Yeah,
nervous?
just think every time I thought of it, your stomach's doing
And this is
somersaults.
before you found meditation or really a
Yeah,
way to cope with that.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So drink a little booze, that kind of strategy.
Yeah, a little. I was what you'd term at that time a passionate drinker.
Yeah.
Um, but, I always say, is it any wonder we reach for those kinds of things when we're under pressure, alcohol or whatever else, nicotine, whatever else it happens to be? Because when we're growing up, what are the things that are, particularly in Ireland, could be similar in Boston, what are the things that are the stress relief tools that are demonstrated to us by the grown-ups around us when we're small? It's generally alcohol, nicotine, uh, shouting, kicking things over, so it's no wonder we tend to gravitate towards those things when we get a little bit older. But I remember the gig. Your first gig is okay because you've got all your family and friends there and they're all cheering for you. It's gig number 2 is the tough one because they're like, "Ah, we supported you, whatever. You weren't that funny to begin with." But I remember my wife was in the audience, and I was standing. It's this really small comedy club in Dublin called the International. It's a small room above a pub, and it has, just I always used to laugh at it because it looks like it was burnt down, but actually it was just never renovated after it. It's pretty low key, rough around the edges. But the MC was introducing me, and I had a guitar because I was doing a comedy song as part of the act. And just as they were going, "Okay, hey, would you welcome to the stage?" My wife leaned into me and went, "Don't do the song."
No.
I was like,
Oh, no.
"What? Dermot Whelan!" I was two of us when I was left looking at her, sort of being pulled to the stage by the momentum, looking back at her going, "Why did you say that? Why? What's wrong with the song?" Anyway, I did the song, and it went down well.
Okay, there
Yeah,
you go.
so I learned a key message is, don't listen to your wife a
Yeah,
few
right.
seconds before you walk on stage. But, I think I was meant to do 5 minutes, and I did the classic open spot thing of, like, doing 25 because you feel like you're killing and you feel great, but then you get off stage and the MC kicks your ass because you've just eaten into everybody else's time, but, yeah, it was good, but as I say, it's the lonely gigs, 2, 3, 4. It's those ones after it that are the real testers, you know?
Now, how did you develop all that material? Because if I understand correctly, like, in order to have 5 minutes of killer material, you almost have to do, like, 40 minutes of set work to figure out what goes into that killer 5.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've just come up from Los Angeles, and I was in Santa Monica, and I went to a comedy club there. Neil Brennan, who does a lot of work with Dave Chappelle, he was trying out new material, and it was just great to watch him working out stuff. He was on for about 40 minutes, and that's the reality. I mean, it's less comedy. It's more sort of active editing. You
Right.
know, it's just constantly cutting away the fat, trim the fat, trim the fat, and I think that's what a lot of beginner stand-ups don't understand. I certainly didn't understand at the start. You start to go into just these sort of padded stories that, may not have punchlines in the right place, and you really have to learn to just be brutal, and it's like writing a book. You're just cutting that stuff out, trim the fat. So yeah, if you start with 40 minutes and you come out with a good 7 or 8, then that's a real win.
Well, I think comedians have, like, a remarkable lightness about them on stage that in some ways masks the incredible amount of work and sacrifice that goes into actually delivering the lines that they're delivering. You, the audience, you're watching and it's like it almost feels like you guys are coming up with it on the spot. Whereas, of course, you've rehearsed it and, tried different variations on it, and just changing a few different words maybe evokes a completely different response. And in a way, it's like all that is masked through the expert delivery, but I think it undersells just the insane amount of work that goes into it.
Yeah, there was a great phrase that we picked up in radio over the years, and that's planned spontaneity,
Yeah,
you know?
right.
And, I guess it's not a million miles from you walking into a negotiation, sitting in a room with money men or something, and you've got your idea of what you want to say, and but you don't want to make anything sound rehearsed, and I guess there's elements of that. But yeah, a lot of the time it's the, I guess, to use a meditation analogy, it's the gaps between the breaths, it's the silence between the notes. So it's not always the joke of what you're saying. Sometimes it's the pause just before you say it,
Totally.
are the impression that you're, looking up and just dreaming up the next part of the sentence when in fact you absolutely know what you're going to say. So yeah, I guess it is that mixture between the words and the gaps between them.
Yeah, Miles Davis has this great quote, which is, "Music is the time between beats." And I think there's a lot that's, like, something I think about a lot in all contexts of life.
Mm.
Even in business, so often as an entrepreneur, you can get caught into this sort of the feeling of the high or the feeling of the low or the feeling of the deal closed or the feeling of it and or the feeling of it not working out, and yet it's actually all the quiet in between that. It's the process, it's the people you get to work with, it's sort of an appreciation for the product you're building or the customers you have, and in a way, that is the time between the beats.
Yeah, and it's an appreciation of that time, as you say, when you're not performing, and that those days are those times where you're walking for a sandwich, just having a look around. They're equally as important because that's, that's where thoughts begin, and where create you need that space, like one of the things that I really try and share with people, particularly people in a corporate world, when they're feeling overwhelmed, is creating that space, because you absolutely, yes, the performance is key, and those moments when you're high-fiving yourself and your team, that's awesome, but we need to create that space. It's that Sanskrit word akasha. We need to build that in, and that could be the length of one breath. It doesn't have to be the big. Now I have to go for the hour jog, or I've got to go and sit on a park bench for 40 minutes. It literally can be one conscious breath, and that can be enough just to create that recovery, and allow that space for thoughts, jokes, plans to emerge.
How did you find meditation?
It was linked to comedy. I had a panic attack while driving to perform at a comedy festival, which is not ideal preparation. I I had never had a panic attack before, but I see different stages in our life. At any given time, we have a life soup. That's how I see it, and all our ingredients are different. And your ingredients today could be different to your ingredients tomorrow, depending on which directions you're being pushed and pulled in. And for me back then, it was like 2007. My life soup was, uh, breakfast radio. So I was getting up at 4:30 a.m. I was doing comedy in the club. So I was getting home after midnight 4 nights a week. So sleep wasn't huge. Thank God I didn't have a whoop back then, or I would have been just in the red all the time. I was starting a young family. And my only coping mechanisms for stress were alcohol and nicotine. That was my thing, and I just thought I could power through it. It's that misunderstanding uh, that we all have at times between resilience and endurance.
Mm.
Nobody knows that better than you, because your whole product is based on understanding that and understanding recovery. But I certainly didn't. I think that's the problem with a lot of people, particularly creative people, who not that I think we're all creative in different ways, but people who like to push themselves and are ambitious generally people who have a lot of stamina are the ones who are going to burn out, because we just don't stop, and until our body goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" And that's what happened to me. I was driving down. I felt this pressure on my chest and my belly. I didn't know what was. It was like the invisible man was just sitting in on top of me. And eventually, I pulled the car over. I was gasping for breath, and because I was panicking, it was getting even worse, and I thought I was having a heart attack or a stroke. And then an ambulance was called. I remember lying on the side of the road, and I was just at the driveway of this house, and it wasn't a particularly salubrious part of the village that I pulled in. I was thinking, don't let me die here. This place called Mullinavat. I don't want to die here. This is not, I watch a lot of Viking TV shows. I wanted to die in a Viking way, where the guy fires the flaming arrow out onto the boat. That's the kind of my funeral that I was imagining. But anyway, an ambulance came. I found myself in the back of the ambulance breathing into a brown paper bag, which I don't think was an official health service brown paper bag, and it
Okay.
still smelt of sandwiches.
Yeah.
um, but when you're sitting in the back of an ambulance breathing into a paper bag, you think, okay, maybe I could say yes to less things, no to more things, and maybe I could find ways of managing stress a little bit better. So quite by chance, after that, I met a lady who was asked me to MC her book launch. She just launched a novel, and she told me that she was teaching meditation to law enforcement. And I was like, that's interesting, because I was very cynical about meditation, the whole world of it. I thought it was just kind of for hippy dippy types,
Yeah.
who got up in the morning and covered themselves in hummus.
Right.
and, but I thought, okay, keep an open mind. You got to try something, because the old Guinness and Marlboro Lights aren't really working for you. So, yeah, so I got on, and I noticed pretty profound changes pretty quickly. Sleep improved, mood improved, And with a lot of these things, it's a bit like when you start working out, you may not notice any changes, but other people might say it to you, and you go, "What's up with you? You seem different." You know,
Yeah.
There's something about you, and meditation does that to you, as you know, 'cause I know you're a keen meditator, but, it was actually my wife who said it to me. She's like, "Have you noticed how, relaxed you are at bedtime? How calm you are around the kids' bedtime, you know?" Not that I was a terrible father before that, you know? She's not like, "Wow, Dermot, you haven't hit the kids in 20 minutes. Well done. Only 2 of them are bleeding. Fantastic." But, I guess what she was pointing to is that, kids' bedtime is one of those natural stress areas of the day. You've come home from work, you're tired, the kids are running around, you just want to go to bed so you can flop down on the couch and watch whatever. But instead of kind of getting tense or aggravated or using a dad voice all the time, she noticed that I was a lot more patient and, a bit more creative, and we were playing games. And in fact, one of the little characters that I used to do with them at bedtime ended up being one that I brought to the radio show and then ended up writing a children's book about.
Wow.
So it just shows you that when you create that space we were talking about, when you can manage to come into the present, so you're not in the future thinking, I just want to be down on that couch, or in the past thinking, God, what a day. My brain is still in that meeting that went pear-shaped earlier. When we can get into that little space, create that space, magical things happen.
When do you meditate, or what's your practice with it?
I like to think that I'm meditating most of the time. Now, I do meditate every morning. I like to I get kind of 40 minutes is my sweet spot. That's where I sort of feel, okay, I've gotten into it. But
And that's a pretty meaningful amount of time.
yeah, but I find takes me at least 15 minutes for the crazy to calm down a little bit, for that I call it the fizz, just to let those bubbles die down. But, life is busy. Sometimes you sleep it out and you go, "Oh my god, it's the time," and you don't get that. But, for me, and what I try and share with people, I talk about the mini moment, and for me, that is almost more important, you know? I've had a few mini moments since I came into this room of just resetting, and that can be one conscious breath. And I think people think, "Well, I need to be doing an hour in the morning and to see the benefits," and, if you're about to have a conversation you're not comfortable with, or a meeting where you're thinking, I really need this to go well, I need to be fully present here," or maybe you just want to be present with the people that you really care about, and you don't want to have your mind still in the working day or thinking about the next one. Those little resets are massive, and they can be simply one conscious breath. I share a 16-second meditation technique. It's called box breathing. I know you're familiar with it. But to reassure people that, 16 seconds can be enough for you to hit that reset button. So when you do walk into that meeting or you do have that conversation, that there's more chance of all that going well if you've managed to just turn off that little smoke alarm in your mind that's possibly ringing and ringing at times when you don't really need it to be ringing.
Well, you mentioned your 16-second technique. Should we try that now?
Yeah, sure. So this is the first meditation I ever learned, and I was surprised and frustrated that no one had taught me this in school. Like, why wasn't anyone teaching me this stuff, you
Oh,
know?
totally.
Um, so the idea, very simply, is you're breathing in for 4, you're holding for 4, you're letting that breath go for 4, and then you're holding for 4, and that's it. And it doesn't have to be actual seconds, it's just their beats. So we can try it. Anybody watching, this is the easiest meditation you're gonna ever do. So breathing in, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4, and let that go. 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. And then you're just breathing normally. And
Easy game.
it's an easy game and a nice little test. If you think of something that's kind of annoying you, something that's just on your mind, you don't wanna go into a full therapy session, but if you just think of something that's kind of niggling at you and do that technique, I guarantee you at the end of that technique, you'll realize that for that 16 seconds at least, you weren't thinking about that little annoying, mental wasp that was flying around, you know?
Yeah, the technique we just did is often referred to as box breathing, and, you can do it with, I think, as little as 3 seconds, maybe as much as 10 seconds, depending on how sophisticated someone gets at
Yeah.
breathing, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's doing so many things, As I said, it is, a lot of our trouble is just that mind wandering, that our mind is bouncing from the future to the past, the future to the past all the time. There's a Harvard study from about 12 years ago that was called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind," and it showed that, 40, almost half of our time, 47% of the time, we're not focused on the thing that we're doing. Our mind is either in the future or it's in the past. And they worked out through this study that the more our mind wanders, the less happy we feel, you
Hmm.
know? So anything that allows us to pull us into that mini moment that I was talking about, anything, and it doesn't have to be the grand gesture. Yes, if you paint or you wanna exercise or whatever it happens to be that gets you into that present moment, then great. But it's those mini moments throughout the day, those little resets that are massive, because I know for me that fizziness that I get in my mind, it's a slow build. And I think for a lot of us, that stress, that overwhelm, that sense of burnout, that sense of if I get one more email, my head is going to explode. That's not instantaneous. That's a slow build. So if we keep introducing these little resets throughout the day, and that could be as easy as just putting a post-it on your laptop, or sometimes I write 16 on my hand, or just anything to remind you just to stop what you're doing. You can even do just a belly breath. I mean, how simple is that? You just put one hand on the belly. I find this works best if you put your hand on your own belly, because you're less likely to get fired or kicked off the bus. But you put one hand on your belly and you just imagine there's a balloon in there. And when you breathe in, you inflate that balloon, you hold it, and then you let the breath go. Feel the balloon drop back down again. And already you can feel things, your cortisol lowering, heart rate slowing, and you are less likely to, scorch the village at at the next meeting you have.
Yeah, for me, it's been a life changer, finding meditation. Funny enough, I actually discovered meditation through a similar kind of moment in time, if you will.
Mm,
I had a panic attack. I was driving in a car. I ended up in the hospital. And by the way, it was such an unfamiliar sensation or state to be in. I actually was wondering, like, had I been food poisoned? Like, I assumed that something had, like, entered my body that, was poisonous or something, and really it was just that I was stressed out of my mind and not taking care of
yeah,
myself.
but that's so funny because a lot of people do that when they feel that panic come on. Our mind goes to these crazy places. I remember when I was in the car. It's funny you just said that because I just remembered I had a bottle um, of organic pink lemonade that was there, and I was, "God, I don't feel well at all." And I think I was smoking a cigarette at the time,
Smart.
and had been drinking the day before to
Yeah.
deal with the nerves of doing this big festival, where all my heroes were gonna be. I remember picking up the bottle of pink lemonade going, "What is in this?"
Yeah.
As if, "Oh, great, raw cane sugar. I mean, really?" You know, How dare they give that to me? This is obviously the cause of my panic, and discomfort, but
I had a very similar thing where I had gone to this, like, sketchy Greek place for lunch in Manhattan, and, of course, I assumed it was, like, the Greek place's food versus, the alcohol I drank the night before or the unlimited amount of coffee I drank during the day.
yeah, yeah. But, all of these occasions are as uncomfortable as they are at the time, are opportunities for us, I guess, to dig right down into what you do for a living, what you're so passionate about, is that understanding how we work. You're looking under the hood. That panic attack was extremely uncomfortable, and it was embarrassing, and it was frightening, but it gave me the opportunity for me to go, okay, my body is sending me signals. My body is giving me information all the time. And so is my mind. So are my thoughts. Everything is giving me information. So isn't it about time I started listening to some of that before it has to scream so loudly? I would like to go to work without involving the emergency services, wouldn't that be nice? So it gives us the opportunity to just to begin to it's a bit like learning a language, you learn the language of your body, and you understand your stressors. What stresses you out, may not stress me out as much, and vice versa. Coffee could have a completely different effect on you than it does to me. I'm a decaf guy because every time if I have a real coffee, I feel like I'm about to sit my end of school exams again, that oh my God. So alcohol is a massive no-no for me. I see it as a wrecking ball for my nervous system, you
So you
know.
don't drink alcohol, you don't smoke anymore.
Uh, I may have alcohol from time to time, but it's
Very infrequent.
very infrequent. It's been months since I had one, and I don't miss it. Definitely don't smoke anymore.
What's up, folks? If you are enjoying this podcast or if you care about health, performance, fitness, you may really enjoy getting a Whoop. That's right. You can check out Whoop at whoop.com. It measures everything around sleep, recovery, strain, and you can now sign up for free for 30 days. So you'll literally get the high performance wearable in the mail for free. You get to try it for 30 days, see whether you want to be a member. And that is just at whoop.com. Back to the guests. Was meditation the gateway for you to have this whole health kick?
Yeah, but it's not as if sometimes I guess the image of meditation is that, and it's the one that I push back against a lot, is the image of meditation that's sold to us online. The lotus position, mountaintop, and as soon as you start, you go, "Oh my God, now I'm pretty much Jesus."
Yeah.
So, it's not that. First of all, it doesn't have to be a mountaintop or a wooden jetty over a lake because, a lot of people don't live there or don't have access to it, and it's a bit impractical to run up a mountain every time you're feeling a bit stressed from work. So it's about just weaving it into your life in small ways. But also, it's a slow burn. Sometimes meditation can bring you to an uncomfortable place, and what it does is it kind of lifts up the the ingredients in your life soup and goes, This is what's going in your life soup. How do you feel about that?" It's not as if it comes up with all the answers and says, "Here, listen, I've taken out this and that, and now it's just chickpeas and positive thoughts." It's not like that. It's for me, it showed me the things that weren't working for me because I finally put the brakes on and created some of that space. And so actually I became really aware that there was a civil war in my mind between alcohol, and the other part of me that just wanted stillness and wellness and feeling good, and that raged for a couple of years, where I would fall back into those, neural pathways and fall back into those things that I thought I needed to reach for to feel calm. And that's an uncomfortable time when we can see where we need to go, but all the old ways of thinking and behaving are still there, and that can be a civil war that's uncomfortable, so it isn't all roses. But I guess, again, it's we just gotta create those little moments of space, whether that's an hour in your morning, 5 minutes, or whether 16 seconds is all you got, then start there, because then you start to have those conversations with yourself. Then you can learn the language of your body and your mind, and actually start working together, because I felt for many years I was pushing against parts of myself. It was a resistance way of living. Whereas now I see myself in partnership. I'm in partnership with my body, and in partnership with the higher version of myself that actually knows a bit more than this one is doing his best day to day. And when you feel like the biggest shift for me, and I would say this to anyone who feels curious about meditation and feels like maybe they're prone to beating themselves up. And again, it's the ambitious go-getters, people with huge stamina are the people who are probably more likely to be harder on themselves. The greatest gift it's given me over the years is that it turned down the volume to almost zero of that voice that beat the crap out of me for years. Now that voice starts from a good place going, let's do our best here and we don't want to forget things or you don't want to mess up. And particularly if you work for yourself, it gets louder and louder because you've got to be on point the whole time. But I remember one day waking up a few years after I started meditating, and I remember, when you have that thought of you never sent an email, and
Hmm.
I went, "Oh God, Dermot, you idiot!" And I went, "Wow, I haven't heard that voice in a while." And I realized that that harshness that was directed at me, that's why I drank. I realized, that after sitting with it for a lot of time, I realized that alcohol was giving me silence from that voice that was beating the crap out of myself. I realized when I was I had like about a third of a pint of Guinness, and I went, silence. And I realized that's what I had been chasing. I'd been
Hmm.
chasing silence from that voice that was beating me up, and if you are curious about getting into meditation, that this could be the greatest gift it will ever give you, is that it will reduce that harshness. It fires up our empathy center when we do it. The brain scans show that. Yes, that means we have kinder thoughts towards other people, but the real winner is that you've kinder thoughts towards yourself. Then you can get out of your own way and get on with the stuff that you want to do, you know. But some people think, is that going to make me soft? You know, I have a brother who is very slowly gravitating towards this, but he's a high flying business guy, runs companies, and he was like, I don't want to do meditation because it'll take my edge. I don't want to be all kumbaya. How am I going to get my stuff done? Even now, he's realizing, okay, actually, that voice that's hammering me all the time is an obstacle. It's getting in my way, and when we just take that stuff out of the way, then we can do magical things. When that voice flips from being our biggest critic to being our number one supporter, like that's a powerful feeling.
I love so many themes that you just touched on. I think the the notion of meditation being fed to us from society in a very woo woo way, it masks what a superpower it is for everyone. And in fact, a lot of these hard driving people who say, "Oh, it's going to make me soft" or something, they're actually the people that it'll amplify their lives the most. And I couldn't believe after I started meditating how many successful people I met who confided in me that they also meditated. And, I've been doing Whoop now for 12 years, so I've gotten to meet many of the highest performing people in the world, honestly, whether they're professional athletes or hedge fund managers or fill in the blank. And I would say 90% of them have some form of meditation practice, which is pretty amazing to think about. You know, Certainly people wouldn't call, Patrick Mahomes or Rory McIlroy or Cristiano Ronaldo like soft. And these are all people who have a form of visualization or breathing or, fill in the blank as it relates to kind of sitting with themselves and thinking and being quiet.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, the way it's been marketed, it really is just a marketing thing. For me, I think meditation is marketed to a very, usually it's very female orientated. It's usually marketed to females with disposable income. It's that sort of clean Lululemon yoga pants type existence, which is wonderful. And it's, all of those, that sector of society need meditation too. But there's a whole other slew of people like, particularly men, I think have been left out of that conversation. When I do my live shows, the thing that makes me happiest of all is seeing the amount of men there, because I've done the spiritual weekends, as part of my training, and I'm just interested in it anyway. But I'm used to being the one guy out of 100 women, or maybe there's another guy, and our eyes are kind of meeting across the room, going, sort of,
Like, don't tell on me kind
yeah,
of thing.
you got dragged here as well, yeah. But a lot more, that's why what you're doing is so important in terms of making it accessible. I have a 16-year-old boy, is my middle child, and he had no interest in meditation. Certainly didn't want to hear his old man, talking to him about it. But it was through fitness. Myself and my wife, he started going to the gym. So he's, typical teenager that just love going to the gym, getting swole. But we could hear one night outside his bedroom, he's listening to a guided meditation. I was like, wow, where is that coming from? But if he had found it through sport, he'd
Right.
found it through listening to videos with the people that he was interested in, and using resources that are presented to him in a sporting fitness environment, you know? So when you bring this stuff to someone in a language they can relate to, they're in, you know? My meditation teacher teaches the same stuff to the San Francisco Police Department. They don't call it meditation, they call it tactical breathing, you know?
Sure.
But
There you
there's a
go.
language
There's
that
a
they
marketing rebrand. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, but it's the same stuff. So to see, the access that Whoop is giving people, that is presenting it to them and going, look, here's it presented in the language of the app that you love on your phone. Why not try that out?
How long you been wearing Whoop?
I was actually discussing this with Abby from your team earlier on, trying to remember when I actually started because it's many years. I was an early adapter of the 3.
Okay.
So that would probably make it 6 or 7
Yeah.
years.
It's been a while.
Yeah. And I guess like so many of the Whoop wearers, it just becomes part of it's just become
Yeah.
part
You'd
of
be
your
kind of
body.
amazed by my tan line here at this point. That's like a
Yeah.
12-year tan line.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it just becomes part of your day, part of your life. I took it up to the top of Kilimanjaro earlier this year, and
Yeah. Congratulations.
yeah, thanks.
That's a
So
good climb.
that was it was a really good experience, tough, a lot tougher than you think it's gonna be. You think your kind of Sunday hike is gonna train you for it, but it absolutely does not, at 5,000 meters when you're
Some
gasping
high
for air.
strain scores.
Super high strain, I guess because the internet was patchy up there, you're kinda getting bits and pieces. What was really interesting was blood oxygen, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
usually
Your pulse
obvious.
ox probably collapse.
Wow, yeah, like, it usually sits at 98% in around there, and I got a glimpse and it was in the low 70s, and I was like, "How am I still alive?"
Yeah, right.
You know? But it just shows you what your body's capable of, and that's when the mental game really kicks in as well, because there's part of you looking at the stats and you're like, how am I, for people who don't know, Kilimanjaro is the world's tallest freestanding mountain. It's in Tanzania, in Africa, and it's just shy of 6,000 meters. So there are real altitude effects when you're up there. And when you feel your body doing that, when you feel your heart, really struggling to keep the machine going, you can start to go into panic mode. And actually, anxiety was something that I noticed amongst the whole crew, that people started to get anxious. It was almost like a Marvel movie where, some baddie has a special power that can amplify everyone's worries. So the older people were worried about having heart attacks and dying. You know, the people who were people pleasers were worried about letting everybody else down, slowing everybody up. And I found that really interesting, that it just amped up everyone's personal anxiety. Because I guess, in many ways, anxiety is a two-way street in that, yes, we can have anxious thoughts and then our body follows suit and starts firing in chemicals. But actually, it can work the other way around. If your physical body is put in a high stress state, the anxious thoughts can then follow, because it's like, oh, we're feeling anxious. Well, we should be worried about something, So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And altitude really can have a profound effect on your body. I mean, interestingly, when we were doing all this research around COVID-19 and an
Mm.
elevated respiratory rate, one of the major things that looked like COVID on Whoop was when someone was not at altitude and then went to altitude. because they had the spike in respiratory rate, they had the spike in resting heart rate, and they had the collapse in heart rate variability.
Mm,
And those became the markers for COVID inside our algorithm. So it was kind of an interesting thing. Now, of course, with GPS, you could figure that out,
mm.
that difference. But anyway, the body's a fascinating thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things that are are my kind of go-to that Whoop really helped me with in terms of seeing the effectiveness of it. And again, I love the fact that just we're learning our own individual languages, and things work for you that may not work in the same way for other people. For me, stretching is massive for my HRV. So any type of yoga, I mean, I was doing it this morning. I know is going to have an impact on my HRV and help my sleep and recovery without a doubt. Chanting is a really interesting one, because I wouldn't be naturally drawn towards that side of things, but I found that if I chanted, or if I when I chant simply Aum, and I do that, it's obviously slowing down my respiratory rate, but that actually has a profound impact on HRV and recovery as well for me.
And how does that work?
So in terms of actually doing it,
Yeah.
so if we were to do it here now, I would just sit with a reasonably straight back, and then you're combining the ah, oo, and sound. So it's and what that does is, and any of these techniques generally, they reduce our breathing to about 6 breaths per minute.
Hmm.
And that there's loads of science around when you do that, you will increase your HRV. It
Fascinating.
has an impact on it.
And
And
box breathing, by the way, which we did earlier, is
yeah,
also shown to increase your HRV. So for those listening who want to improve their HRV, there's two little techniques we just went over today that
yeah,
improve your HRV.
yeah, really effective. There's a really cool study that came out of Italy in 2001, and what they discovered was they compared Buddhist chanting, the Om Mani Padme Hum chant, and they compared that to the the rosary. So people doing decades of the rosary from Catholic faiths, and they found that they had exactly the same effect. They created heart coherence, so people's heart rhythm started to beat in sync. But also, they both increased HRV and they reduced breathing to, on average, 6 breaths per minute. And it's the same across Native American styles of chanting and wherever you go around the world. So it was something that I was showing to my teenage son. I was using the Whoop, and I got him to start chanting Om, and he's like, "Oh God, Dad, really?" And I was like, "Just do it." And I put the Whoop on his wrist, and I had the heart monitor, and I was saying, "Just watch that while you're doing it." So he's going, "Oh," and you see his heart rate drop and drop and drop and drop and drop.
Pretty
By
cool,
about
yeah.
15 beats per minute. Within a few within about 30 seconds or so. So, as much as we kind of knock those hippier side of things, there's actually a lot of science in there, and they're very, very effective.
Well, I know we gotta let you get out of here, but I wanna wrap by saying that you've written this best-selling book, Mindful: Unwreck Your Head to Stress Your Life, and it's terrific, and in the beginning of the book, you talk about, this experience where you're on stage doing stand-up comedy to 10,000 people, and you get off stage and you don't really feel much. And then, I forget the period of time later, but you
It
give
was
this
2 days.
2 days later, you give a speech in front of a corporation to 30 executives teaching them about meditation, and at the end of that, you were buzzing, and you had felt something of, I think something of a calling from it.
Yeah, for me, it highlighted that word fulfillment, which I think is one that we sort of read about and we see maybe on aspirational quotes on Instagram. But when you feel it, it's very real. And I think for me, fulfillment is anything where you're bringing more of you to the table, you know? And I guess at that time, 10 years previous to that arena show, I would have been like just buzzing for months after doing comedy on that stage. By the time I got to that moment that I talk about in the book, there were other parts of me that had been brought to the surface, that quieter, stiller, meditator part of me who liked to think about things a little bit deeper. And when I found myself using all the skills that I had gained over, 2 decades beforehand on stages, but then was combining that with the information and passion that I have around meditation and how it can help us, in our daily lives, that was fulfillment for me because I was bringing all of me to the table. And even though I was in an insurance company, to 30 people who, some of whom looked interested, I couldn't have been happier because if I got to one person, that's all the difference for me. That was just more fulfilling than a huge crowd of laughing people. But it's not to take away from, anyone who does that or all the times that I did it, but, you know, to get that sense of fulfillment, how much of you are you bringing to the table every day? And I think that's why a lot of people get disillusioned in their jobs and get tired and get cranky in their jobs
Sure.
because maybe that software, they're running was suitable for them a few models back, whereas where they are now requires a bit of an update. And maybe that is, sometimes you think that, oh, do I have to blow up my life now and go in and tell my boss to go screw himself? You know, no, sometimes it's just introducing something that's representative of another part of you. Maybe it's just doing something with your coworkers, that isn't work related, but that you're able to help them with. Maybe you can teach them to do something or share some knowledge that you have in some other part of your life with your work colleagues. Those things can have a massive impact, and then you're starting to feel fulfilled.
Well, I'm happy you found that calling, and I think you're an unbelievable ambassador for meditation and focus and all the benefits of it. So, thank you so much for coming on this podcast, spending some time with me. The book is Mindful, Unwreck Your Head, De-Stress Your Life. You've got the Mindful podcast, which has just come out very recently, so people can check that out.
Yep, and there's Mindful, the live tour, which will be happening as well. So that's a great opportunity for me to get into big theaters and bring people, I call it belly laughs and belly breaths. So you stand up to, get them into that space where they're open to it, and then they're 1 minute they're laughing, next minute they're meditating.
Dermot, thank you.
Thanks so much, Will. Pleasure to be here in Boston as well. I'm a huge Ray Donovan fan, so this is very exciting for me.
Well, it's been great having you. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you to Dermot for joining me today to discuss his passion for meditation and mindfulness. Be sure to check out Dermot's show, the Mindful Podcast, for more of Dermot's great insights. If you enjoyed this episode of the Whoop Podcast, please leave a rating or review. Please subscribe to the Whoop Podcast. Check us out on social at Whoop, at Will Ahmed. Have a question you want to see answered on the podcast, email us podcast@whoop.com, call us 508-443-4952. If you're thinking about joining Whoop, you can visit our website to sign up for a 30-day free trial membership and take the first step to unlocking your own best performance today. New members can use the code WILL, W-I-L-L, to get a $60 credit on Whoop accessories. And that's a wrap. Thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next week on the Whoop Podcast. As always, stay healthy and stay in